So good to see my church family here. And I know it's good for you to see each other too and to worship God. Please turn your Bibles to the 14th chapter of the book of Job, Job chapter 14. This lesson is dedicated to Joe Campbell. Joe actually asked me many months ago, I'm guessing 9 or 10, if I would preach a sermon about one verse in particular in this chapter. And Joe, I apologize, it's taken me this long. Job chapter 14, and I'll start at verse 1. Man who is born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. Now that may seem overly pessimistic until you consider the context. The one who is saying those words was the very one who lost everything of value to him in a very short period of time. In fact, he lost all his wealth, but far more importantly, all his children in one day. Not long after, he lost his health. In fact, as he's speaking these words, he can't even stand. He's too weak to stand. He is in perpetual pain and constantly scratching himself to an incessant itch. Besides all that, his friends, which I suppose he would have considered his best friends, had come with the intent of supporting, comforting him, and they were doing just the opposite. They were accusing him of crimes that he'd never even dreamed of committing. And this was just so hard on Job. No wonder he says those words, man who's born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. He comes forth like a flower. In other words, he gets off to a good start and fades away. The good is short-lived. He flees like a shadow and does not continue, which has to do with the fact he will not continue physically. At some point his life will end. Verse 3, and do you, speaking to God here, open your eyes on such a one? Speaking of God looking with a critical eye at Job, and bring me to judgment with yourself? He's saying, God, are you judging me relative to you? I mean, how can that be? I mean, doing something like that would be light years beyond comparing apples to oranges. No man can compare to God under any circumstances. And just to emphasize the point, he says, who can bring a clean thing out of an unclean? Job considering himself unclean. No one. And folks, you have to realize, Job never claimed to be sinless or without flaw. He did insist that the accusations of his friends were totally erroneous, without foundation. And he also insisted that he was innocent of any intentional, egregious sin which would have caused God to take away his wealth, his children, and his health. The very thing that his friends were saying, that is the case. Verse 5. Since his days are determined, and again, Job speaking primarily about himself, the number of his months is with you. You have appointed his limits so that he cannot pass. Job realized that it is appointed unto man once to die. It's appointed to Job to die. Hebrews 9:27. Look away from him. And again, speaking of look away from me in terms of this callous, implacable gaze, that he may rest, till like a hired hand he finishes his day. For, verse 7 is very important, for there is hope. Now I want you to know that that's what all this discussion is about, hope. Job is looking for hope. Hope always implies something that you look forward to, something better that lies ahead. There's hope for a tree, and of course trees, living, part of life, of value to God, but not nearly as important as mankind would be. There is hope for a tree if it is cut down, and of course meaning cut well above the roots, what you and I might call an extreme pruning, that it will sprout again, and that its tender root shoots will not cease. Though its root may grow old in the earth, and its stump may die in the ground, the stump itself might appear lifeless, yet at the scent of water it will bud and bring forth branches like a plant. I think many of you have seen that. Fresh shoots emerging from a tree stump that had been cut down maybe years before. Verse 10. But man dies and is laid away, buried. Indeed, he breathes, and his last, and where is he? That's really what Job wants to know. After a man ceases to breathe, where is he? As water disappears from the sea and the river becomes parched and dries up, so man lies down and does not rise. And speaking here, physically speaking, he does not rise. And so for those of you who are zombie fans, I'm sorry, that's just a figment of man's imagination. There are no walking dead. To the heavens are no more. They will not awake nor be roused from their sleep. And he's speaking here purely from a physical viewpoint. Man, it's impossible to bring back the dead. Even today, with all our scientific technology, oh, sure, people have been raised who've been dead a few minutes. Some people are actually caused to die in an operating table. Their hearts cease to beat or are caused to stop to beat so that they can be revived. But there's a time clock on that, and it's a very strict time clock. Beyond a certain time, there's just no return. Verse 13, very interesting here. Job early on in this book actually says death would be preferable to what he's going through. In fact, he said it'd be much better had he never been born to endure the pain, the grief of losing his children and his health, not to mention his wealth. Oh, that you would hide me in the grave. If we can't go back in time and you stop me from being born, this would be the next best thing. Hide me in the grave, that you would conceal me until your wrath is past. That you would appoint me a set time and remember me. Very interesting language. In other words, God, why don't you hide me in the grave? Take my life, hide me in the grave, until such point as you're in a better mood. Because Job thinks all of this is caused by God being angry with him. He doesn't understand the conversation that took place between God and the devil earlier on to cause all this. So he thinks God, for some reason, is just mad at him, taking out everything on Job, and that's why he's suffering. So God, in other words, just take my life, hide me in the grave until you feel better. But don't forget me. Don't leave me there. It's like he's saying, set an alarm to go off so that you'll remember, oh yes, Job, he's in the grave. The bottom line is, God, hide me, even if in the grave, until your wrath is past, but don't leave me there. Don't let that be the end of Job's story. And then verse 14, springing right from that, if a man dies, and he knows he is going to die, shall he live again? That's the theme of the lesson. Did you know that may be the second most important question ever asked by a man? If a man die, shall he live again? I think the first most important question is, what must I do to be saved? Asked by a jailer in Philippi to Paul and Silas in Acts the 16th chapter and the 30th verse. If a man dies, shall he live again? You know, when I was looking at this, I found out, to my own surprise, there are a lot of views on that, by the way. You'd think, well, either he will or he won't. Well, listen. Did you know even atheists disagree on the answer to that question? Atheists who disbelieve in God. A substantial number of atheists believe in an afterlife. You say, well, how could that be if they don't even believe in God? I don't know. I'm not sure by what mechanism they could even believe that an afterlife would take place. But a substantial number believe that following death, we simply evolve, graduate in some greater form of, or higher form of existence. Other atheists actually believe in reincarnation. What I call the recycling of the identity. The coming back into a baby the moment one dies and being born, as it were, and then living another life. And then at death, another baby is born, and that person somehow is transferred there. Of course, there's no mechanism explaining, especially with no creator to take charge of any of that. Still, other atheists only believe in two things. They believe in life, and they believe in the grave, and that's it. Well, let's talk about some world religions, what they believe. Buddhists also believe in reincarnation. But to them, reincarnation is not the desirable thing. Just being born and reborn into life itself and experiencing the hardships of life is not good. So their goal for according to their view, is that our soul would escape that cycle and reach what they call nirvana, which is some sort of paradise. Hindus believe almost the same thing with a twist. Hindus, not Hebrews. Hindus believe in reincarnation, but depending on how you live your last life, that would determine what you'll be in your next life. If you lived a good life, then in your next life you'll be reincarnated into a human who's of a higher status, or maybe more wealth, or more power, fame, whatever. But if you didn't live a good life, you could come back as a pig, a cow, and mosquito, or poison ivy, even a plant. Anything that's living, you could capably or possibly come back as, or again, possibly as a human. But again, even the Hindus believe that the ultimate goal is to be released from that cycle and achieve what they call moksha. Moksha simply means to be released, no longer to be reincarnated, and after that occurs, your soul will ultimately unite with Brahman, which is the ultimate reality, whatever that means. I'm not sure about it. I've never studied that in detail. Oh, several other religions. How about Islam? Muslims definitely believe in the afterlife. They believe that after a person dies, he goes to meet with the death angel. And he hangs out with the death angel until the judgment. And then after the judgment, their earthly life, depending, of course, on how well they followed Muhammad and his teachings, will determine whether they go to Jannat, which is their version of heaven, or Jahannam, their version of hell. I found out that spiritualists, and I guess it makes sense, believe definitely in an afterlife. They believe that after you die, you're not reincarnated, but your spirit lives on and goes to a spiritual realm. You may evolve into a higher spirit, more developed spirit, I guess. But they believe under certain circumstances, all those departed spirits can interact with persons, living persons, through mediums, or maybe through other means. Let's talk about the Jews. What did the Jews worldwide believe in terms of the afterlife? And I found out that their beliefs differ widely. Many Jews deny the existence of an afterlife. I think the Sadducees during the days of the apostles would have that idea. They just believe you focus only on this life, because this life is as good or as bad as it gets, so make the most of it because that's all you have. That old beer commercial, you only go around once in life, grab it with all the gusto or whatever you can. That would be the feeling of some Jews. Other Jews, however, believe it in reincarnation. That's a very small minority, but some Jews accept that. And then there are other Jews, like you and me, that believe in heaven and believe in hell. And then before I get to Christians, let me cover one other group. That would be the Catholics. The Catholics as a group definitely believe in the afterlife. But in addition to heaven and hell, they believe in a place called purgatory, which is a so-called in-between realm, where there's neither suffering nor really pleasure. It's just a place where souls would go if they require additional purification to get to heaven, because of their earthly sins or omissions or whatever, but eventually they will be allowed into heaven, depending on who is praying for them and how bad their sins were on earth. But let's talk about Christians, true New Testament Christians. Obviously, we believe in the afterlife. And many believe, based on the parable Jesus told in Luke chapter 16, about the parable about the very poor man, and the rich man, that our souls will initially reside in paradise or torment until the judgment, and from there we will go either to heaven or hell. But that's the ultimate destination, heaven or hell, as Jesus made clear in Matthew 25:46, as he describes the end of the judgment scene. All right, so why do we as Christians believe so strongly that if a man dies, he will definitely live again. When I first started working on this lesson, I had 6 reasons. That's now 12, and that's why this will take at least next Sunday as well as possibly the following Sunday. So let's just get right into them. I'll only have time to cover maybe 4 or 5 this morning. Number 1, first reason we believe if a man dies, he shall live again, because the very man that asked that question to start with evidently believed very strongly that yes, there is an afterlife. Going back to Job 14, verse 14, if a man dies, shall he live again? Listen, he continues. He says, all the days of my hard service I will wait till my change comes. Change. Now, some people interpret that to mean until God changes his mind and Job's life changes for the better. Well, I might say that's a possibility, but there's no indication Job really felt his life would get better. Now, it did in the end of the story, but he didn't know that. He didn't know that. The word change there, by the way, can be translated to be renewed. To be renewed. And the reason I say that is because according to the Apostle Paul, that's exactly what will happen to us after the resurrection. We will be changed. We will be renewed. I'm reading from 1 Corinthians 15, beginning at verse 51. Paul said, behold, I tell you a mystery. He was writing to Christians who are wondering themselves what's going to happen after we die. And there was a great debate among the Corinthian Christians. What's going to take place? Some were even denying that there was going to be life after death. He says, we shall not all sleep, referring to death, but we shall all be changed. We'll be renewed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. That trumpet in reference to the return of Jesus Christ, Revelation 8, 6 through 8. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised, incorruptible. And we shall be, and again, using that same word Job used, changed. Changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. And he discusses that more in verses 42 through 44. But let's go back to Job, Job 14. And let's go to verse 15. Job here speaking of what would happen after his death, when he does die, when he is in the grave. He says, you, God, shall call, and I will answer you. I'll hear you, even from the grave. And then he said, you shall desire the work of your hands. In other words, at some point, and he's not talking about his lifetime, but after he's hidden, as it were, in the grave, God will desire him again, and God will say, okay, Job, now things are well. The most important thing Job says here is that God will not forget about him after he dies. Death will not be the end of Job's story, and that's what he was hoping for. And by the way, in Job chapter 19, verse 26, Job says this, after my skin is destroyed, and typically that refers to the decay of the skin in the grave, this I know, that in my flesh, somehow, in some form of flesh, I shall see God. Job believed that yes, if a man dies, he shall live again. That's reason number 1. Reason number 2. We believe that because King Saul believed that, even though it was the most unpleasant experience in which he learned that even if a man dies, he'll live again. Turn your Bibles quickly to 1 Samuel chapter 28. 1 Samuel 28. I'm going to begin reading at verse 7. 1 Samuel 28, starting at verse 7. Saul was desperate. A vastly superior Philistine army were marching against the Israelites. And of course, Saul, being not only king, but the commander-in-chief. He knew they didn't stand a chance without the intervention of God. So he was praying to God for guidance, for help, for strength, for deliverance, for a plan, a military plan. And God ignored him. Even when he asked the so-called prophets of his day, go to God on my behalf, find out what I should do. They basically said, we have no answer. So he tries something desperate. Then Saul, again 1 Samuel 28, 7 and following, then Saul said to his servants, find me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her. a medium, someone who supposedly can contact departed spirits, as the spiritualists believe. And of course, spiritualists make people believe that they can do that and are very convincing. They've got a lot of tricks up their sleeve, as it were. So King Saul is trying to reach one of the few friends he ever had, a man by the name of Samuel, who had recently died. And his servant said to him, in fact, there is a woman who is a medium at Endor. So Saul disguised himself and put on other clothes, and he went. And he had to do this because he'd made a decree. One of the good things Saul had done is made a decree that all mediums, spiritualists, whatever, should be banned from the land or killed if they were even found in the land. So if he goes as King Saul, no spiritualist, including this medium, would ever meet with him. So he disguises himself. All right. And went, and 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night. In other words, he's doing this in as much secrecy as possible. And he said, please conduct a seance for me and bring up the one I shall name to you. Folks, I don't think this medium at Endor had ever done what she's about to do. But she's only going to do it now because God permits it. Because God has a lesson for King Saul. And in doing so, Saul will know there is life after death. All right. Then the woman said to him, look, you know what Saul, the king, has done, how he has cut off the mediums and the spiritists from the land. Why then do you lay a snare for my life to cause me to die? In other words, you're just setting a trap to expose me. And Saul swore to her by the Lord, saying, as the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. And then the woman said, whom shall I bring up for you? And he said, bring up Samuel for me. Now, there's a lot more to this story than we'll have time to get into, but so she does her best, to conjure up some spirit named Samuel, except she sees Samuel. God allows this. And she is just frightened, surprised. She cried out with a loud voice. Mediums normally don't scream when they seemingly bring up somebody. They normally are very calm because they have this routine. This woman just shouts. She's not even sure what's going on. And the woman said to Saul, saying, and again, she's not speaking to Samuel. She looks directly at Saul. Now, God has revealed this to her too, that this man that she just thought was just anybody, she knows now this is the king. Why have you deceived me? For you are Saul. So she thinks, oh man, he's going to cut my head off right here. And the king said to her, do not be afraid. What do you see? And the woman said to Saul, I saw a spirit ascending out of the earth. So he said to her, what is his form? I mean, what does he look like? And she said, an old man is coming up, and he's covered with a mantle. Folks, this medium, witch, whatever, had never seen, to our knowledge, Saul, but she knew what Saul looked like. She knew how he was typically clothed. And Saul perceived that it was Samuel. And he stooped with his face to the ground and bowed down. Saul's problem was he often bowed down to the wrong thing. He frequently bowed down to the whims of the people. Now he bows down to the spirit of Samuel, the last thing Samuel would ever want him to do. Now Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? Wherever he was very comfortable. But now it's like that's been interrupted. So he's rebuking King Saul. And Saul answered, I am deeply distressed, for the Philistines make war against me, and God has departed from me and does not answer me anymore, neither by prophets nor by dreams. Therefore I have called you, that you may reveal to me what I should do. Then Samuel said, "Why then do you ask me? Seeing that the Lord has departed from you and has become your enemy. And the Lord has done for himself as he spoke by me." By the way, this information that she shares, that Samuel shares, is something that this medium could have never known. So this is God allowing this conversation to happen. It's a real, genuine conversation now between the departed spirit of Samuel and King Saul. And he continues, "For the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand." This was a previous conversation between Samuel and King Saul when Samuel was still alive. "And given it to your neighbor David." And you can read about that in the 13th chapter of 1 Samuel. "Because you did not obey the voice of the Lord, nor execute his fierce wrath upon Amalek," a horrible example of disobedience by the king. "Therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, I'll tell you the future. The Lord will also deliver Israel with you into the hand of the Philistines." In other words, you're going to lose this thing. "And tomorrow you and your sons will be with me." In other words, you'll die and your spirits will be here. "The Lord will also deliver," and not only you, by the way, your sons too. "The Lord will deliver the army of Israel into the hand of the Philistines." Then immediately Saul fell full length on the ground and was dreadfully afraid because of the words of Samuel. Somehow he knew, well, anything Samuel's prophesied before has always come true. This is going to come true too. "And there was no strength in him, for he had eaten no food all day or night." We'll stop there. King Saul definitely believed if a man dies, he will live again. Just two more examples, two more reasons we believe, and then we'll pause until next Sunday. I'm going to finish this sermon on Sunday mornings because I think it's important that you all hear it. The third reason we believe if a man dies, he will live again is because King David had no doubt that, yes, a man will live again after death. The most well-known chapter of the entire Bible in the world is called Psalms 23. In the 5th verse, the last verse, David ends that psalm by saying, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all of the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." David was not talking about the temple in Jerusalem because nobody could live there forever. They would die. But in heaven, yes, one can dwell forever. In Psalm 17, verse 15, speaking of his own death, David said this, "As for me, I will see your face in righteousness. I shall be satisfied when I awake in your likeness." When I awake, he's talking about awake from death in a form similar to yours. Psalms 49:15, "God will redeem my soul from the power of the grave, for he shall receive me." Psalm 73:24, David says, "God, you will guide me with your counsel, and afterward receive me to glory." And you remember in 2 Samuel chapter 12, concerning his first son by Bathsheba that died in infancy because of his sin. 2 Samuel 12:23, David said, "I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me." I will go where he is. He's not talking about the ground. Well, I just can't wait to go to the ground to be where my son is buried. No, he's knowing the soul of his son has gone on and I'll go to him. The last and fourth reason we believe, if a man dies, shall he live again? Yes. Something Daniel said. A lot of people say there's no real place in the Old Testament that talks about life after death. Oh, yes, there is. We've already shown that. Let me just read quickly from Daniel, the 12th chapter, verses 2 and 3. How could you even intentionally believe from reading this that the Jews did not believe so much in life after death? Daniel 12, he said this, "And many of those who sleep," talking about death, "in the dust of the earth, shall awake." And not only awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. "Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament. those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Oh, yes, we have very good reasons and more to come why we believe if a man dies, he shall live again.